I was in the waiting room at my doctor's office when my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter, Courtney. Mom, I sold the Cape May house and Dad's Hamilton watch. Derek and I are leaving for a Caribbean cruise. One way. I froze. That house rebuilt by Thomas after the storm. That watch on his wrist every day of our marriage. Both gone with one careless text. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. The hum of the overhead lights seemed louder, like they were mocking me. In that moment, it wasn't just about money or things. My daughter had treated our history, our love, as something disposable, and I was left holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than stone. My name is Lydia Harper. I am 68 years old, a retired school librarian, and a widow for just over a year. Most days life is simple. I water the balcony plants, read with a cup of coffee, and turn on the radio to fill the silence that used to belong to Thomas. Thomas was my husband of 40 years, a steady man, patient and careful. His proudest project was restoring the Cape May beach house after a hurricane nearly leveled it. Every nail he hammered was a promise that we were still standing. And his Hamilton wristwatch, silver, with a worn leather strap, marked every season of our marriage. He wore it at graduations, birthdays, even while mowing the lawn. To Courtney, those things were assets. To me, they were memory itself. That's why her text cut deeper than she could imagine. It wasn't just a sale, it was an erasure. I stepped outside the clinic, needing air. The October sky felt sharp against my skin as I dialed Courtney again. She answered on the second try, her voice rushed. Mom, I can't talk long, we're packing. Packing? I asked, my throat dry. Courtney, you sold the beach house. You sold your father's watch. She sighed, impatient. Mom, it was just sitting there. The realtor said it was a good market. Derek and I needed a fresh start. It's just stuff. Just stuff? My voice cracked. Your father built that house with his hands. That watch ticked through every milestone of our lives. Mom, please, don't be dramatic. Derek already booked the cruise. We deserve this. You'll be fine. You have your apartment. The line went dead. I stood on the sidewalk, cars rushing past, feeling like an intruder in my own family's story. The silence after her words was louder than any argument. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights blur, while memories pulled me back to Cape May. It wasn't just a house. It was where Thomas taught Courtney to ride her bike along the boardwalk, running beside her until she finally pedaled free. It was where we celebrated birthdays with balloons tied to the porch railings, and where Thomas tried not to cry when we sent Courtney off to college. I remembered the hibiscus I planted by the steps, the smell of grilled corn drifting on summer nights, the familiar creak of the back hallway floor that never went away no matter how many times Thomas tried to fix it. To Courtney, the house was a property. To me, it was our family story pressed into wood and brick. Selling it wasn't just business. It was tearing out pages of who we were. The next morning, I walked into the bank where Thomas had spent most of his career. The polished counters, the cool marble floors, it all felt familiar, almost comforting. The manager, who had known Thomas for years, pulled up my records. His face tightened. Mrs. Harper, I'm afraid your daughter had durable power of attorney. The transactions she made yesterday were legal. The funds are already transferred. I gripped the edge of his desk. Legal? He nodded gently. I know how much those assets meant to you. I'm sorry. I left the bank with nothing but a stack of papers that meant less than the silence in my chest. I had trusted Courtney. I had believed love would guide her choices. Instead, she used the authority I'd given her to cut me out. That morning, I learned that power without responsibility is a dangerous gift. That afternoon, I sat across from a young attorney named Aaron Kaplan. His office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. He looked confident, the kind of man who spoke in neat legal phrases. I laid out everything: Courtney's message, the sale, the bank's confirmation. Aaron listened, then folded his hands. Mrs. Harper, contesting this won't be simple. Durable power of attorney gives your daughter wide authority. Unless we prove fraud or coercion, the court may side with her. And even if we fight, it could take years and cost you heavily. The words landed like stones. I had come hoping for a way forward, but left with a folder of documents I couldn't bear to read. On the street outside, people hurried past with grocery bags and briefcases, their lives untouched. Mine, on the other hand, had been dismantled quietly, legally, and by my own child. That evening I sat at my dresser staring at the photo of Thomas in his work suit, tie slightly crooked like always. My eyes drifted to the back of the drawer where I kept a small velvet box and a sealed envelope he had given me before he passed. "Open this only if you ever feel cornered," he had said. At the time, I brushed it off, but that night my hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, written in his careful script. "Lydia, if you're reading this, it means things turned difficult. The accounts and properties listed here are in your name. Use them wisely, you are not powerless. Always keep a plan B." Alongside were documents, account numbers, deeds to rental units, and proof of an LLC that owned the very building where Courtney and Derek lived. Thomas hadn't left me defenseless, he had left me prepared. I set the papers down and leaned back, Thomas's words echoing in my head. He had given me more than assets, he had given me a choice. I could use this power to crush Courtney and Derek, to humiliate them as they had humiliated me. A part of me longed for that, the sharp justice of revenge. But another voice, softer yet stronger, reminded me of what Thomas always said: strength doesn't have to shout. What mattered more, punishment or teaching? I realized I didn't want to destroy my daughter. I wanted her to learn, to grow into someone who understood the weight of love and responsibility. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about boundaries, firm lines that could guide her back. Mercy didn't mean surrender, it meant offering a chance, but on my terms. The next morning, I met with a different attorney, Evelyn Cho. She was older, steady, the kind of woman who spoke with calm precision. I told her everything: the text, the sale, Thomas's envelope. Evelyn read the documents, her eyes sharp. At last, she said, "You're not as cornered as you think." Within a week, she had revoked Courtney's power of attorney for misuse of trust. She filed to stall the Cape May sale, forcing it into review. But her boldest move was simple: a 30-day notice to vacate the luxury condo Courtney and Derek called theirs. Because the truth was undeniable. The building never belonged to them. It was held by the Harper Family LLC, and I was its sole member. When the notice slid under their door, silence followed. Louder than any shouting, it told them their foundation had never truly been theirs. 2 nights later, a knock rattled my door. Courtney stood there, clutching the eviction notice, her face pale. Derek loomed behind her, jaw tight with anger. "Mom, this has to be a mistake," Courtney said. Her voice shook. "This can't be legal." Evelyn sat calmly at my dining table, waiting. Derek shoved the paper toward her. "We bought that condo. It's ours." Evelyn opened a folder. "No, you leased it. Title never left Harper Family LLC. Miss Harper has full authority to end your tenancy. Every signature proves it." Courtney's eyes darted over the pages. Derek sputtered about investors and fairness, but the weight of Evelyn's certainty silenced him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I looked at my daughter and said quietly, "You treated our memories like clutter. Actions carry consequences, Courtney. Now you'll decide what comes next." A week later, I drove alone to Cape May. The autumn wind off the ocean was sharp, carrying the scent of salt and pine. The house stood weathered but proud, the porch railing worn smooth by years of hands. When I stepped inside, the boards groaned beneath my weight, familiar as an old friend. Dust hung in the sunlight, as if time itself had paused to greet me. I moved slowly through the rooms, the kitchen, where Thomas cracked crabs in summer, the hallway where Courtney once tossed her sandy shoes, the back deck where Thomas and I had dreamed of years we thought we'd share. On the porch, I placed my hand on the railing and whispered, "We're still standing." That night, with the waves pounding the shore, I knew my next step. Mercy would not mean forgetting, but it could mean teaching. Back in Annapolis, I sat with Evelyn in her office, sunlight cutting across rows of heavy books. She listened while I spoke of Cape May, of memories too heavy to lose twice. "You could evict them, cut ties completely," Evelyn said. "But is that the ending you want?" I stared at her yellow legal pad, where she'd drawn 2 columns, mercy and boundaries. "If I strip everything away," I said, "they'll only grow bitter. If I do nothing, they'll never change. I need something in between." Evelyn tapped her pen. "Then we give them a road that teaches, hard edges but not destruction." Thomas's voice echoed in my memory, "Consequences should teach, not crush." I realized my answer. Mercy wasn't surrender. It was a clear line drawn in ink, not sand. and I would hand Courtney that line myself. We met again in Evelyn's office, the air tense. Courtney sat with her hands knotted in her lap. Derek leaned back, arms crossed, defiant. I slid a folder across the table. Here are your choices. Accept these terms or walk away with nothing. Courtney's voice was small. What terms? First, you'll move into a smaller apartment I own. Rent-free, but modest. Second, Derek must have steady, documented work, no vague deals. Third, Courtney, you'll volunteer 12 hours each week at Maple Haven Senior Center. Fourth, you'll cover your own living expenses. I won't fund your lifestyle. Derek scoffed. This is absurd. We're adults. Yes, I said calmly, and adults live with the results of their choices. Courtney swallowed hard. And if we refuse? Then the eviction stands. The condo, the privilege is gone. It wasn't anger that filled the silence. It was clarity. This wasn't punishment. It was a ladder. Whether they climbed it was up to them. Courtney signed the agreement, her hand shaking. Derek muttered but followed. A week later, she walked into Maple Haven for her first volunteer shift. She stood stiffly in the common room, clipboard in hand, unsure what to do as residents surrounded her with stories she hadn't asked for. Mr. Doyle told his Navy tale 3 times in an hour. Mrs. Collins asked her to braid her hair, though Courtney had never braided anyone's hair in her life. By the 3rd visit, something shifted. When Mr. Doyle grew agitated at sundown, Courtney didn't retreat. She knelt, humming a lullaby he once mentioned. His breathing slowed, his hand loosened in hers. For the first time, I saw my daughter act without expecting applause or reward. She was present for someone else, not herself. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a beginning, a fragile thread that might, with time, grow strong enough to hold. The changes were quiet at first. Courtney stopped taking taxis and began riding the bus. She packed her own lunches, simple sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. On her apartment wall, sticky notes read, "Keep promises. Show up. No excuses." Derek resisted longer. He grumbled about wasted potential, about opportunities slipping away. But after 2 months of rejections, he took an entry-level job at a shipping company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. He brought home pay stubs, proof he was finally doing something real. Courtney sent me short updates. 3 shifts done. Mr. Doyle asked for me again. It's not easy, Mom, but I'm trying. One afternoon, she handed me a small notebook labeled restitution log. Inside, she recorded volunteer hours, money saved, and lessons learned. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments and pride, but something had cracked open, and through that crack, light was beginning to enter. It happened on a rainy afternoon while I was sorting through Thomas's old files. At the very bottom of a wooden chest hidden beneath tax records and faded photographs, I found a sealed envelope. My name was written across it in his careful, slanted handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. "My dearest Lydia," it began, "if you are reading this, it means the first storm has already passed. I always trusted that you would guide our daughter with a firm hand and a forgiving heart. But I also knew that one day she would need a new beginning, something to build, not just to repair." Inside were documents for a small plot of land on the edge of Seabrook, right next to our old summer cottage. Thomas had purchased it years ago, quietly, planning for the future. His note ended with a line that caught in my throat. "Maybe one day you and Courtney will stand side by side, building something lasting together." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the deed spread before me, listening to the rain tap against the windows. Thomas had left us more than property, he had left a vision, a chance to start anew. The next morning I asked Courtney to meet me for coffee. She arrived in her work uniform, looking tired but different, more grounded, more real. I slid the deed across the table. She stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "Your father's plan," I said softly. "He wanted us to build something together. A place that wasn't about money or pride, but about giving back." I explained the idea of Harbor House, a retreat for seniors, a home by the sea where the lonely could find company, where families could reconnect. Courtney's eyes welled up. "After everything I've done, you'd trust me with this?" "It's not about trust," I told her. "It's about redemption. And redemption begins with work." Courtney and I visited the plot of land the following weekend. The rain had cleared, leaving the grass damp and shining under the sun. From the edge of the property you could see the water, a wide, calm stretch that Thomas had loved. "This was his vision?" Courtney asked, squinting at the horizon. Yes, I said, and now it's ours to shape. We brought in an architect, a kind man named Mr. Hughes, who specialized in community spaces. He asked questions neither of us had considered. How many rooms? Should there be gardens? What about accessibility? Courtney surprised me. She spoke up with ideas. We need wide hallways for wheelchairs, a reading nook, and a kitchen big enough to cook for a crowd. I watched her sketching on a notepad, her enthusiasm growing. It wasn't the daughter who once obsessed over luxury cruises and designer handbags. It was someone else, someone Thomas must have believed she could become. For the first time in years, I felt hope blooming alongside my grief. Construction began in late spring. At first it was only trucks and noise, cement mixers growling, lumber stacked in neat piles, workers shouting measurements across the lot. But slowly, Harbor House began to rise from the ground. Courtney was there every weekend, sometimes after work too. She carried supplies, asked the crew endless questions, even swept sawdust from the floors when no one else would. The Courtney I had known before would never have lifted a hammer. Now she borrowed gloves and helped lay bricks. One evening, as the sun set behind the half-built frame, she turned to me with dirt smudged on her cheek. Dad would have loved this, wouldn't he? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The neighbors grew curious, stopping by with casseroles and questions. Soon the whole town knew about Harbor House. Instead of gossip about betrayal, people spoke about new beginnings, about the strength it takes to turn pain into something good. And through it all, Courtney stood beside me not as a burden, but as a partner. On a crisp autumn morning, Harbor House opened its doors. The building smelled of fresh paint and cedar, sunlight streaming through wide windows that looked out toward the sea. We had decorated the main hall with photographs of Thomas, quiet reminders of the man who had sparked it all. The first guests arrived slowly, two elderly widows, a retired teacher, and a grandfather whose family lived states away. Courtney greeted each of them warmly, carrying their bags, asking their stories. Watching her, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't the same daughter who once sold away our memories for a fleeting luxury. That afternoon, as residents settled in, Courtney stood beside me on the porch. I know I can never undo what I did, she said quietly, but maybe I can build something that honors him and you. I took her hand. This is the best apology you could ever give, Courtney, not words. Action. The waves rolled in steadily, like a heartbeat. Harbor House was more than a building, it was proof that broken things could be rebuilt, stronger than before,